Hello, and welcome to Tremendous Testicles of History, the show where we'll be discussing the testicular fortitude that made all the difference in the human story. For today's show, we will be talking about a certain Gaius Marius, arguably the most famous Roman you've never heard of, and moreover, one of the baddest motherfuckers in human history. The salient moment of this man's life is the very inspiration for this show. Now, why is this moment so deserving of the title of the inspiration for such a groundbreaking and insightful show as the Tremendous Testicles of History? It sticks out to me in all of the historical texts I've ever read, both primary and secondary sources, as the most balls I have ever seen. He has more balls than a McDonald's ball pit. And I'm teasing you. And I know I am. And I know it's not fair because you're wondering what is this moment. But I feel before we can get to this moment, that we need to know what the fuck we're talking about. Now, I said that Gaius Marius is the most famous Roman you've never heard of. Well, first of all, who the fuck are the Romans, and moreover, why do we even care? We live in an age of instant messaging and instant travel and planes and ships and intercommunication, and we feel like anything before 30 years ago is so far in our past that it's beyond consideration. And as much as it is tempting to think like that, I believe that when one thinks about the Romans, you have to think about if we were trying to set up our civilization, our world today, without electricity and without gunpowder. That is what the Romans look like to me. It looks like an imitation of our world minus the technology. It is so similar, it is scary. The interconnected trade networks, the political systems, the economic systems, the class systems. It is a less technologically advanced imitation of our world. Now, I can understand how different the Romans must seem to us, or how different anything more than 10 years ago must seem. In many ways, the Romans were unbelievably similar to us. They lived in urban societies that were massively interconnected, they had postal services, they were multicultural, multi-ethnic. They even had fast food. I mean, they even shaved their pews. I mean, that's a little known fact of history there, but the Romans kind of were the pioneers of manscaping in all its forms. And what I find fascinating about Roman conceptions of pubic hair is that only someone who was truly manly deserved pubes. Like, a young man had to shave his pubes until he earned them. And what a society that produces. This is a people that determines your bed by the size of your testicles. Now, our main man, Gaius Marius, was born in 157 BC, which I understand means fuck all to you. In terms of history, what this meant for our man Gaius is that he came about in a time when, much like today, Rome was suffering from its own success. It had accomplished too much and gone too far and no longer had the institutions to deal with the problems that it had created. If you look at our world today and the problems that we face, our political institutions are no longer capable of dealing with the problems. Now, what is different and drastically different from the Romans compared to us is that all Roman politicians that Gaius Marius would eventually become, all Roman politicians were generals and soldiers. It was a prerequisite for entrance into politics was service in the military. And imagine how that changes a society. Imagine what it would do to us if Hillary Clinton had to go to Baghdad with an M4, strap on a flak vest and clear houses. Imagine how that would change the stakes of the political game. Everything is life and death. You know, not only is the prize everything, but so is the loss. It's not like you can just retire to Virginia and write a book. If you lose, you die. Your army gets surrounded in the middle of buttfuck nowhere and you will get murdered by these barbarians. It's not a fun world to live in. And the resulting influences on a society by playing at those stakes is immense. The Romans were starting to feel the effects of trying to deal with this, of having people that were playing this political game where it was life or death in a world where it was life or death. And this led to huge problems in Rome. Now, Gaius Marius came from a very old and respected family in Rome. Now, as I talked before about factionalism, I guess it's important to talk about these two factions, and they are eerily similar to what we see in pretty much every democracy today, where you have one group that represents old money and wealth and the traditional families of the land, be it conservatives or Tories or Republicans, take your pick, it's the same shit. And on the other side, you have Democrats, which are more of a working man's, practical, just the everyman's party. Now, Gaius Marius came from the wealthy older families. You know, he was the entitled heir to a family that wasn't wealthy but had a big name. Gaius Marius, instead of just taking the path that people in his position would always take, he was the unexpected G. He was the G that came out of left field. Now, here in New Zealand, we had a Prime Minister called John Key, and he has a wanky little son called Max Key. The way I like to picture Gaius Marius, if Max Key turned out to be a bad motherfucker, because Gaius Marius made his name by killing a barbarian king in single combat. That's like if Max Key ran up on a fucking Hell's Angel and beat the fuck out of him. Okay, that's how out of left field Gaius Marius was for the time, and he became legendary as a result. This initial claim to fame of defeating a barbarian king in single combat, which, again, like the way to visualize it is you're fist fighting a fucking a Hell's Angel, a biker gang, man. This would define Gaius Marius's life. He was a bad motherfucker. There are accounts of Gaius Marius going to plays in Rome, and whenever the central Roman character wanted to talk about his feelings, as we would say in the modern world, Gaius Marius would stand up and say, "I'm not listening to this Greek bullshit." He'd walk out of the theatre, walk down the road to the local pub or brothel, and just get pissed with the normal people, and this made him immensely popular. So now that I've set that scene, I think it's necessary to describe an aspect of the Roman world that we don't really have to deal with today outside of movies. Alien invasions. You gotta understand that before fucking satellites and the internet and everything else, anything that was beyond the known world, that was beyond the horizon, was essentially fucking alien. If someone said to you that there's fucking frost giants in Norway and you'd never been to Norway, you might believe it, but back then, you were going to believe it, because what else were you going to fucking think? If some guy said he'd been to Norway and there was an ice giant there, you'd believe it. There is no internet, there is no reason to believe otherwise. And moreover, this is exampled by people appearing over the fucking hills all of the time that look nothing like you and are fucking terrifying. The example of this in the story are two tribes called the Cimbri and the Teutons that today we would call Germans. It's vital to remember that this is tremendous testicles of history, not exact historical fucking account of what happened. If you want to go read Plutarch, Livy, or any of the other historians that describe these things and describe these Germans, feel free. You gotta remember, these people aren't from Germany either. This is just what the fucking Romans decided to call them. They are essentially 7 foot tall, grey-haired, grey-eyed Mark Hunts. Now these aliens, as we're gonna refer to them, the Cimbri and the Teutons, were just smashing Roman armies. And you gotta realise that the Romans, by this time, about 100 BC, maybe a little bit earlier, when Gaius Marius has come of age and he's already killed his first few people and he's coming up, Rome is the military superpower of the age, and they're not used to losing, and they're losing hard to these aliens. They're getting fucked hard, and not in a fun way. Gaius Marius ends up being the solution to this problem. He ends up being the Will Smith in Independence Day. What Gaius Marius does is, remember, he's got this relationship with the people, he's immensely popular, and he's famous for being G'd out, but G'd out with the people. He's down with the set, if you will, and he uses this popularity to fundamentally change the way that Rome fights its wars. Traditionally speaking, most ancient armies, Greeks, Romans, fucking Mesopotamians, take your pick. What you do is you get a bunch of people that own land and have farms to go and fight for their stuff. That's your accreditation in society. You're not so dumb that you can't fuck up growing corn. If you can manage that in a household, then you get to vote and you get to fight for your country's rights. Much like the American system of giving landed people a vote ensures that you're going to get people who are engaged in your society involved in its formation and its continuation. But the problem is, these armies are getting fucking murdered by these aliens. The economic situation in Rome, much like today, has gotten so bad the 1% has claimed so much land that there's not really anyone left anyway to go and fight these fucking aliens. So Gaius Marius fixes this problem by inventing a new kind of army. Instead of having to own land to vote or to be a citizen, you earn your citizenship through combat. You sign up for the army, you're given weapons and armor and training, and you go and fight for the state, and in return, you get to keep what you take. If you recall earlier, we used the example of Hillary Clinton running around Iraq with an M4 to describe what the situation that Gaius Marius was in politically. He was a soldier, but he was also a politician that was trying to go places. And now he'd created his own army of poor people that wanted to get shit through victory. This was a sea change in the way that Rome operated, and the results were instant and dramatic. These fucking aliens that had been again, this is why I called the guy Will Smith. Because before, they were just getting smoked, and as soon as Will Smith runs in the motherfucker, they go and fuck these aliens up, and they devastate them, and it's on a scale that we cannot imagine it today. Contemporary historians and archaeologists now believe that 100,000 people died in the space of a few football fields. I can't even imagine what the fuck that looks like, and I can imagine a lot of shit. Can anyone imagine what it looks like to see 100,000 human beings dismembered in a football field? I can't. So Gaius Marius stands triumphant. He has defeated the aliens that has posed the greatest threat to Rome in 200 years. I cannot see a parallel in modern society for how the ideas and the actions of one man change the world around him. And this is why, unfortunately, most tremendous testicles of history are to be found in the past. These testicles are so tremendous, that should not detract from the point. As a reward for Gaius' success, he gets something that the Romans call a triumph, and this again is something to us that we cannot understand. What a triumph essentially was a parade for you where you got to embody a god. And this was considered to all Roman citizens the highest honour any man could achieve. And this just shows how strange the Romans were. I love to talk about how similar we are, but in ways we just do not compare. Gaius Marius was carried around the streets of Rome in a chariot with his face painted red to symbolise Mars, the god of war. The whole time, he had a slave standing next to him whispering in his ear, "Remember that you are mortal." What kind of society is this? It's so similar to ours in so many ways and yet so different. And these differences and similarities bring us to a point, the whole point of this show, the seminal testicular moment of Gaius Marius' life. Now, Gaius Marius' successes had come at a cost. He played a very dangerous political game in Rome by doing what he had done, and he was soon to face the consequences. Many wealthy Roman senators and politicians on the opposite side to him, on the Republican side if you're an American, or take your pick, had become frustrated with his attitude and his constant siding with the people and his arrogance and success. Especially after his triumph where he got treated like a god. I mean, can you blame him, motherfucker? So they planned to have him killed, and who better to kill him than one of these fucking aliens that had just been busy wiping out? A Cimbri or a Teuton, we don't know. So these senators paid an assassin, and they invited Gaius Marius to the Senate House, which is something similar to a parliament today. So he's invited to this place. He feels pretty tremendous. His testicles are fucking loaded. I mean, he's just defeated 100,000 aliens. You'd feel pretty good too. So he's walking towards the Senate House, and these senators, they're anxious. They know that something's about to happen, and moreover, they're about to kill the person that just saved them from the aliens. So as Gaius Marius walks into the Senate House, he looks around and he sees the stares on him, and he can tell that something is wrong. I mean, this is a G motherfucker, like he knows what's up. He can feel that something's wrong. And this brings us to the moment that we've all been building towards. The tremendous testicles moment. As he walks towards the podium to give his speech, he hears footsteps coming behind him. He turns and looks. One of those Germans, one of those aliens, approaches him with a sword, ready to kill him. Gaius Marius, the saviour of Rome, killed by an assassin, paid for by his brethren, and he turns to this man and he screams, "You dare kill Gaius Marius?" And the alien does not. He stops, he drops his sword, he looks at this man, this G, this Titan, and he says, "I can't kill Gaius Marius," and he runs off.
Oh, dude.
Even after all these years and ages and advances of technology, you can still feel those testicles echoing through history. Those amazing balls that turned around to face certain death and said, "You will not kill me. You are not worthy of such a thing." This brings me to the salient point of this show. This is not about a clear narrative of history. There's been 1,000 books and 1,000 podcasts about that. This is about those salient moments that ring out through the ages and tell us that we are something different. It's not even necessarily about balls. I mean, we will bring up lady balls in future shows, and they will be tremendous lady balls. But Gaius Marius will always be, to me, tremendous testicles.